Today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about compound interest. Compound interest is nothing more than an investment. Interest is calculated at regular intervals and added into the account. As a result, you earn interest on the interest. So before, you used to do a thing called simple interest. Now, simple interest, all you did was just take the amount, multiply by the rate, and multiply by the time. Now, imagine you get your interest and that money's tacked onto it, and then you get multiplied by the rate again. And now that's your new interest. And now you keep doing that again and again. Now, for us, we're going to use a thing called the future value. The future value, which is this equation here, is equal to the present value times 1 plus I to the exponent n. The future value is basically the total of the original investment and the interest all tacked together. When we're talking about the present value, that's the original amount of money that you actually started with. When we're talking about the interest rate, that's the interest rate adjusted for said interest. Now, when we're talking about n is the number of times the interest is calculated. So let's go over some basics. When we're dealing with compounding frequency, we have to understand how we're either going to divide or multiply by in order to figure out what the compounding rate is and what the number of compounding is. Every time we talk about interest rates, we're always talking about the interest rate per year, compounded annually. So if it compounds annually, what happens is our interest actually increases. When we're talking about annual, we're talking about the number of calculations per year. In that case, the number of calculations for 1 year is 1. If we have something that is considered a semi-annual interest, basically that happens every 6 months. So that means there's actually 2 times this happens in a year. When we're talking about quarterly, it really means 4 times. And when we talk about monthly, it means the interest is calculated exactly 12 times. When we're talking about weekly, we are talking about 52 weeks. And when we're talking about daily, there are 365 days in a year. I guarantee you something like this will be on a quiz. And it will be on your quizzes until every single person in this class gets these answers and recognizes what annual means for the number of calculations, what quarterly means, what semi-annually means, what weekly means, and what daily means. And it will always be on your quizzes. So this chart, this information that is on this chart is on your next quiz. Guaranteed. Now, let's continue. The other thing that you should notice is that on your quiz, we're also going to have all of these definitions that you see right here. All of the definitions and all of these will be here. What I want you to remember is that there's going to be a quiz. I'm going to make sure I write that down here so there is no question. Note, there is a quiz. There will be a quiz. On compound interest. Basically, it's the stuff that we learned about today. And the information that we're looking at today are 3 different key points. The first point are the definitions that we talked about earlier. You must memorize them. You must understand the frequency numbers. You must also realize that on your quiz, there's going to be 2 math questions. That will force you to identify the future value, present value, and the I and the N in our basic equation that we have right here. Remember, our entire calculation is based on this equation, and I'll show you how that works right now. So now we've got our first problem that deals with future value. It says determine the future value. The future value is always defined as this equation. V is equal to PV 1 plus I to the N. Now, remember that the future value represents the amount that we have at the end of a certain amount of time. The PV represents the amount of money that we start with. Okay? And N is the amount of time something compounds. So, let's begin our first calculation. So, FV is equal to PV 1 plus I to the N. That's basically our starting equation. We need to recognize that the PV is our starting value. So we start, in this case, with $2,500 that we put into our bank account. And we'll just put $2,500. And we have 1 plus. Now we have to figure out what I is. I is equal to, well, we have to look at 4.2%. Now, the big issue is 4.2% is the same as saying 42 divided by 100, which turns into 0.042. Now that is what we're using for part of our I calculation. And so we'll actually just write that out, 0.042. And then because we are dealing with something that happens semi-annually, that means it happens twice in a year. So we're going to divide that by 2. And now our N value. That N value that we have here has to be determined somehow. Now, basically what you want to think of is its N, which is actually 6. Now, the reason why it's 6 is because this 6 value is really the number of years, 3 years, and then we multiply it by 2. So if you think about it, what's actually happening is we take our rate and divide by the number, and then we take the number of years and multiply by the number in order to get the exponent. Now, just punching this back into the calculator, we simply get the following. Punch this exactly like you see this into the calculator, but for you, when you write it in your calculator, you'd write 2,500, 1 plus 0.042, and you would divide by 2, and then raise it to the power of 6. And that's how you would punch it into your calculator. When you get your final answer is always going to be in 2 decimal places. So we get $2,832.01. And I'm actually just going to put a nice little box around this real quick so that we know what our future value is. Then I need you to come and put down your final statement. Therefore, the future value is $2,832.01 Now, we're going to do the same problem again, except this time we have a different starting value. In this case, it's 3,800. We have 3.5 years, which is really just 3.5 years, isn't it? And our 5.5%, we have to do a calculation to figure out what that means. So we're going to change that into 5.5%. Now, I'm not going to go through all the calculations to find 5% as a decimal. I'm just going to do it right now. So there's what we have. Now, we'll always start by writing our basic equation. FV is equal to PV 1 plus I to the n. Now, we're just going to substitute exactly what we know. The present value is just the 3,800. The 1 plus, now the I is the rate per compounding period. So we're going to go 0.055, and then we're going to divide that by, now it's compounded monthly, so we're going to divide that by 12 and raise it to the 3.5 times 12, 3.5 times 12, 42. It ends up being 42. So n in this case is 42. We punch in our final answer and we get $4,604.63. And that is our future value. Now, when we do our calculations, all we have to do now is state our final answer. Therefore, the future value is $4,604.63. And now, these questions here are similar to what we've done here. The notes are online and your teacher will provide you with these questions to work on page 76. And now what we'll do is we're moving on to the second portion of the lesson. Now we're going to determine the interest rate. So this is a special type of problem. When we calculate the interest is the amount of money that we had at the beginning, and then what we're going to do is we're going to add the interest to it. So it tends to reason that when we're talking about interest, we're actually going to take the future value and subtract the present value in order to get the interest. So if you think about it, what you have in the future minus what you have at the start gives you the interest. So the first thing that we have to do is we have to identify all of the key parts. In this case, I have 1750 for my starting value. 5 years helps me to determine my n and 6.1%. Now my 6.1%, I'm going to write as 0.061. And this represents my present value. And then this helps to figure out my years. So when we do our calculations, we'll always start by writing FV is equal to PV 1 plus I to the n. Now the present value is $1,750. We have 1 plus 0.061, and then we have to divide it by, well, if it's quarterly, if something's compounded quarterly, the key number is the number 4, so we're dividing by 4. Now, in order to calculate the n value that we're looking at here, we have to take the number of years and multiply by 4. So 5 times 4 gives 20. punching these numbers into our calculator, we get FV is equal to, well, 2,368.63. And what we do now is we're going to just circle our key number here. Now, our next equation that you're going to learn about today is calculating the interest. The interest is equal to the amount in the future, which is the future value, minus the starting value, which is the present value. So what we do is we're just going to take these two numbers and we're just going to subtract them. So our future value is 2,368.63. And we're going to subtract that from our original amount of $1,750. So basically what happens is our interest is equal to 618.63. And we state our final answer. Therefore, the interest earned is $618.63. Full stop. That's it. Now, remember that you're going to have a quiz tomorrow. Be sure to be able to describe our variables. And that's FV, PV, I, and N. And they are described at the beginning of the note. You must memorize them. You shouldn't need to look at a cheat sheet for something like that. Now, these are the questions that are very similar to this question here. Good luck, kids. You noticed how I've basically broken up the questions. You have to take your time, work through the questions, and check to make sure that the answers are correct. The sheets that I've given you have all of the answers on them. Don't waste your time in class. Good luck, kids. Bye.